are. Day 45, Bob. Okay, so we put these back in there on September 2nd, and today is October 17th. So here we are. So we are unlocking the chamber.
Yeah, 45 very patient days.
And you know, the thing that's been interesting is we've maintained 36 degrees solid all the way through, and the humidity level's been between 84 and 86 the whole time. I think we'll start out with our ribs. Sound good?
Right, sounds good.
This is a first for me. And this is definitely very challenging.
Very solid. It's like cutting through, almost like cutting through wax.
What we're trying to do here in this process is try to salvage as much of the meat between the bone as possible.
Nice and red, dark red. Obviously the proteins have, looks like the protein is condensed. The fat is more wax-like. It's very dry, it's like cutting through a candle.
I think, Bob, you know, we could have just skimmed this whole thing and taken off the ribs with the meat that's in between it off, but what we're trying to do here is preserve some of that.
That's where a lot of
and I guess we'll see if that's the right way to go for next time.
Considering if we were cutting this with fresh meat, the ribs, if we pulled the ribs off in its entirety, we would be able to reutilize the
That's
ribs.
right.
Where here, this becomes waste, and you want to salvage the meat in between the bones. I think it's a worthwhile exercise.
So this is the first step, and these bones would not be, the backside of these bones would be problematic for consumption. Whereas the interior, if you take a look at that meat, it's still red. It's got a definite, beautiful smell to it.
Really does.
I'm thinking, Bob, that this may be hard to salvage in here, but maybe every other steak would be able to be a little bit bigger. We can pick up a couple of ounces on each rib. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ribs. We could potentially pick up an extra 12 ounces of, 12 to 14 ounces of meat. I'm going to try to not take too much of this for waste. We're going to take the exterior portion. We're going to try a little skim. Notice that we don't have to go in far before we get to some really nice, clean meat. We're taking off that dried out beef and that rancid-like fat. But we have to remember, this is also the cap, the nicest part of that rib. And we don't want to lose any more of this than we have to.
As you can see, I go down as deep as I can until I lose the color of the brown.
And that's about as far as the oxygen would have been able to penetrate into there, or the ambient air. And you see, the rest of this is just oxidizing for the first time right now. The thing that's magic about what we've done here, Bob, is we've got something that was the absolute extreme, the 45-day cure, versus some of our finest steakhouses in the country will go for would be a 21-day cure, the most economically viable and producing a great steak. But this is the actual most extreme holy grail of dry aged beef. We'll see what the numbers tell us, but based upon what our yield loss will be, I'm saying we're right now aiming for what would have to sell in a restaurant for a $100 steak.
Yes.
Then all of that needs to be factored into, oh my gosh. Now this is a prime piece of meat, and I'm gonna actually get this cleaned off as much as I can before we start to get a look at it. But this is a perfect example of what the difference is between the quality level of one steak and another. USDA Prime refers to the highest marble content in beef, and it represents only 2% of the beef that's slaughtered. So when you look at it, it's outrageously marbled. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a piece of beef marbled.
It looks
like
like
that.
It almost as marbled as Wagyu beef. It's got that same unbelievable marble. And to be honest with you, when we put them in there, it didn't look as marbled as this is cutting. Maybe it's wishful thinking. It got better. There we go.
Clean off the exterior here. I mean, the texture of this meat, Bob, is
It's unbelievable.
it's just incredible.
Yep.
All right, so Bob, I'm going to put these subprimals back on the scale here, and let's see what we ended up with after trim. So 7.60. That one started out today before we trimmed it at 13.21, and the initial primal was 15.12. So
Exactly 50%.
yeah, about 50% trim to get it to where it's at. I'm going to start with this one, Bob, and there's still going to be additional trim to this as we go and we clean it up, because each one of these steaks is going to be a masterpiece from here. It looks like these steaks are going to be roughly, as you said, Bob, about 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches thick. There's our first steaks right there. Probably, again, you know, about as good as it gets. If you're trying to figure out what a $100 steak looks like, that's about it. I can definitely pick up a nice aroma, Bob, from mine as I'm
Very
cutting
nice.
it here.
Beautiful. I'm glad we saved the rib meat. It actually made a big difference, and
It's a lot of work to do that.
it was, but I think well worth it.
Again, the starting cost of this material was about $310. So we actually come up with 16 steaks, Bob. 310 divided by 16,
20 bucks a piece.
about 20 bucks a piece. So this would be a steak that, you know, we'd be expecting a retail at restaurant of about $60 a la carte.
14 pounds. 13.9.
Yeah, 13.9 pounds. Starting weight was 30.2 pounds, and we ended up with 13.9. So a
40.
loss of about 55%.
Yep, 55%.
Hard to imagine.
It is hard to imagine. And typically a rib would be what? A loss of about 20. The yield would be 80% versus
Yeah, if that,
45%.
Right.
So it's about half the yield of a normal rib.
So time to pack them up. We're going to individually vacuum seal these until they get off to their final place of enjoyment.